Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. I adjusted my tie as Letitia, and I stepped into the opulent ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. The annual gala for Stratton and Ackerman Investment Bank was in full swing. The air filled with the chatter of colleagues and the clinking of champagne flutes. "You look beautiful tonight," I told Letitia, admiring how her midnight blue gown accentuated her figure. She gave me a distracted smile before her eyes darted across the room. I followed her gaze and saw Andre Ackerman, my business partner and CEO, glancing in our direction. As we made our way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with co-workers and clients, I kept a watchful eye on Letitia and Andre. Throughout the evening, I noticed their furtive glances, the way Andre's hand lingered a bit too long on Letitia's lower back during a conversation, and Letitia's frequent absences from the main hall. "I'm going to powder my nose," Letitia said for the third time that night, her perfume lingering as she slipped away. I nodded, maintaining my composure as I engaged in small talk with the CFO's wife. But my mind was elsewhere, piecing together a puzzle I'd been working on for months. As the night wore on, I felt a growing tension between Letitia and myself. She seemed distant, laughing a little too loudly at Andre's jokes, standing a little too close to him during conversations. I sipped my scotch, the amber liquid burning a path down my throat, as I watched the charade unfold before me. "Ron, my man!" Andre's booming voice cut through the ambient noise as he approached, pulling Letitia along with him. The scent of expensive cologne and top-shelf whiskey wafted towards me. "Great party, isn't it?" I nodded, noting how Andre's arm was draped possessively around Letitia's waist. "It certainly is, Andre. You've outdone yourself this year." Andre's eyes, glazed with alcohol, narrowed as he looked at me. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth, and I braced myself for what was coming next. "You know what, Ron?" Andre slurred, pulling Letitia closer. "I've got a little secret for you. Your wife here, she's been coming to me for years. Better performance. If you know what I mean, right, sweetheart." He turned to Letitia, whose face had drained of color. "Oh, and those kids of yours? They're mine, too." The room seemed to fall silent, though I knew the party continued around us. Letitia's eyes widened in horror, darting between Andre and me. I could see the panic rising in her, the realization that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. But I was prepared for this moment. I had anticipated it, planned for it. I took a slow sip of my scotch, letting the silence stretch for a moment before I responded. "Funny you say that, Andre," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Your wife's been telling me the same thing. We've known each other for months now. She told me everything. I've been quietly securing my assets for weeks." The effect was immediate. Andre's smug grin faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and then dawning horror. Letitia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she stared at me in disbelief. "You're bluffing," Andre stammered, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. I simply smiled, raised my glass in a mock toast, and walked away, leaving them to grapple with the implications of my words. As I made my way through the crowd, I could feel their eyes on me, hear the whispers starting to circulate, but I held my head high, knowing that this was just the beginning. The ride home was silent, the tension in the car palpable. Letitia stared out the window, her reflection in the glass showing a mixture of fear and defiance. I focused on the road ahead, my mind already racing with the next steps in my plan. As we pulled into the driveway of our penthouse, I knew that the real confrontation was about to begin. The carefully constructed facade of our marriage was about to shatter, and I was ready for whatever came next. The elevator ride up to our penthouse was excruciatingly silent. Letitia's fingers drummed nervously against her clutch, while I stood stoically, watching the floor numbers tick upward. As soon as we entered our home, the dam broke. "What the hell was that about, Ron?" Letitia hissed, tossing her clutch onto the marble countertop. "How dare you embarrass me like that in front of everyone?" I calmly poured myself a glass of water, buying time as I formulated my response. I embarrassed you? That's rich, Letitia. Tell me, how long have you been sleeping with Andre? Her face contorted in a mix of shock and indignation. What are you talking about? Andre was drunk. He was lying. You can't possibly believe. Stop. I cut her off, my voice low but firm. Just stop. I know everything, Letitia. I've known for months. She faltered, her bravado cracking slightly. You're being ridiculous. I would never. I walked over to my study, retrieving a thick manila folder from my desk drawer. I hired a private investigator, I said, returning to the living room. I have photos, hotel receipts, text messages, everything. Letitia's face paled as I spread the contents of the folder on the coffee table. Her eyes darted from image to image, her and Andre entering various hotels. Screenshots of intimate text exchanges, credit card statements showing purchases she couldn't explain. How could you do this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I laughed humorlessly. How could I do this? How could you, Letitia? 15 years of marriage, 2 children, and you throw it all away for what? Some cheap thrills with Andre. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I had cried my own tears months ago when I first discovered the truth. It's not what you think, she stammered. Andre and I, it just happened. You were always working, always at the office. I was lonely, Ron. You have no idea how lonely I've been. I shook my head, disgusted. Don't you dare try to pin this on me. I worked hard to give you and the kids everything you could ever want. If you were unhappy, you should have talked to me, not jumped into bed with my business partner. Letitia's demeanor suddenly shifted, her sadness morphing into anger. Fine, you want the truth? Yes, I've been sleeping with Andre for 3 years now. He makes me feel alive, Ron. When was the last time you even looked at me, really looked at me? Her words stung, but I refused to let it show. 3 years, I repeated, the full weight of her betrayal sinking in. And the kids? Are they? They're yours, she spat. Andre was just drunk and running his mouth. But God, sometimes I wish they weren't. At least then I'd have something that was truly mine. The silence that followed was deafening. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before I spoke again. I've already talked to a lawyer, I said quietly. I'm filing for divorce. Letitia's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Ron, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. Take some time. No. I cut her off firmly. There's no coming back from this, Letitia. It's over. She stared at me for a long moment, realization dawning in her eyes. You've been planning this, haven't you? All this time, you've been, what, gathering evidence? Planning your escape? I nodded, not bothering to deny it. I needed to protect myself. And the kids. At the mention of the children, Letitia's face hardened. The kids? You think you're going to take my children from me? Our children. I corrected her. And yes, I'm filing for full custody. Given the circumstances, I think it's best for them to have a stable home. Letitia laughed bitterly. You think you can come out of this looking like the hero? I'll fight you every step of the way, Ron. I'll take you for everything you've got. I remained calm, my voice steady as I replied. You can try, Letitia, but we both know how this will play out. Your affair, my evidence, it's not going to look good for you in court. The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. What happens now? She asked, her voice muffled. Now, I said, gathering up the evidence and returning it to my study. You pack a bag. You can stay at your sister's until we sort out the details. I'll explain things to Robert and Julie in the morning. As I watched Letitia retreat to our bedroom to pack, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Anger, sadness, relief, but mostly a determination to see this through to the end. The life we had built together was over, shattered by her betrayal. But I was determined to salvage what I could from the wreckage, for myself and for our children. I poured myself another drink and settled onto the balcony, watching the city lights below. Tomorrow would bring a new set of challenges, but for now, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The hardest part was over. The truth was out. Now, it was time to plan for the future. The next morning, after a nearly sleepless night, I found myself in the familiar surroundings of Santiago Lutz's law office. Santiago, my longtime friend and now divorce attorney, greeted me with a sympathetic smile as I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "How are you holding up, Ron?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. I fixed my hairs, exhaling deeply. "As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's been a lot." Santiago nodded, pulling out a legal pad. "I can imagine, but you did the right thing, gathering all that evidence. It's going to make our job a lot easier." He paused, his expression turning serious. "Now, let's talk about your options." For the next hour, we delved into the intricacies of divorce law. Santiago explained how Letitia's affair would impact our case, given that we lived in a fault-based divorce state. "The evidence you've gathered is crucial," Santiago emphasized. "It gives us a strong position not just for the divorce proceedings, but for the custody battle as well." At the mention of custody, I felt a knot form in my stomach. About that, I began hesitantly. "Andre, he made a claim last night about the kids not being mine." Santiago's eyebrows shot up. "Do you believe there's any truth to that?" I shook my head. "No, I don't. But I need to be sure." "Understandable," Santiago replied. "I'd recommend immediate DNA testing for both Robert and Julie. It'll put the matter to rest and strengthen our case for custody." As we discussed the potential impact on the children, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. How do I protect them from all this, Santiago? They're going to be devastated. My friend's expression softened. "It won't be easy, Ron, but the best thing you can do is be honest with them in an age-appropriate way. Shield them from the uglier aspects as much as you can, but don't leave them in the dark." I nodded, making a mental note to schedule a conversation with the kids as soon as possible. "Now," Santiago continued, his tone turning businesslike again, "let's talk about your assets. You mentioned you've been making some transfers." I leaned forward, lowering my voice out of habit even though we were alone. "Yes, I've been moving some funds to secure accounts. I wanted to protect them from Letitia's potential claims." Santiago listened intently as I detailed the financial moves I'd made over the past few months. When I finished, he sat back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've been smart about this, Ron. Most of what you've done is perfectly legal, but we'll need to be careful about how we present it in court. We don't want it to look like you were hiding assets." For the next hour, we outlined a strategy for the divorce filing, custody arrangement, and division of assets. Santiago's expertise was reassuring, and I felt a glimmer of hope that I might come out of this ordeal relatively unscathed. As our meeting drew to a close, Santiago fixed me with a serious look. "Ron, I need you to understand something. This is going to be a long, potentially ugly process. Letitia isn't going to go down without a fight, especially when it comes to the kids and the money." I nodded. "I know, but I'm prepared for whatever comes next." Santiago stood, extending his hand. "All right then, I'll start drawing up the paperwork. In the meantime, try to keep things as civil as possible with Letitia. Document any interactions, and for God's sake, don't do anything rash." As I left the office, I felt a mixture of dread and resolve. The path ahead was clear, but it would be far from easy. I thought of Robert and Julie, of the difficult conversations to come, of the battles that lay ahead with Letitia and Andre. But beneath it all, there was a sense of liberation. The truth was out. The wheels were in motion. Whatever happened next, I was ready to face it head on. I straightened my tie as I stepped into the gleaming elevator of Stratton and Ackerman Investment Bank. The weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily on my shoulders, but I knew it was necessary. As the doors slid open on the executive floor, I took a deep breath and steeled myself for the task ahead. My first stop was the office of Harold Jameson, the head of our board of directors. Harold had always been a fair and level-headed man, which was exactly why I chose to approach him first. "Ron, good to see you." Harold greeted me warmly as I entered his office. "What can I do for you today?" I closed the door behind me, my expression grave. "Harold, I'm afraid I have some concerning information to share with you. It's about Andre." Harold's bushy eyebrows furrowed. "Andre? What's going on?" I took a seat across from him, leaning in close. "I've recently become aware of some questionable behavior on Andre's part. Behavior that I believe poses a significant risk to our company." Over the next hour, I carefully laid out the evidence I had gathered. I started with the affair, framing it as a potential conflict of interest and abuse of power. Harold's expression darkened as I spoke, but I could see he was reserving judgment until he heard everything. Then, I moved on to the business improprieties I had uncovered during my investigation into the affair. Questionable expense reports, misuse of company resources, potential insider trading, the list went on. "My God," Harold muttered, rubbing his temples. "Ron, this is serious. Have you brought this to anyone else's attention?" I shook my head. "No, you're the first. I wanted to handle this discreetly, given the sensitive nature of the information." Harold nodded, his expression grim. "You did the right thing coming to me. We need to call an emergency board meeting. This can't wait." As I left Harold's office, I felt a mix of emotions: relief that the first step had been taken, guilt for what I was about to put the company through. The next few days were a whirlwind of hushed conversations and closed-door meetings. As a major shareholder, I was deeply involved in the discussions, presenting my evidence and answering questions from the board. When the day of the emergency board meeting finally arrived, I could feel the tension in the air. Andre swaggered in, his usual cocky grin in place. But as the meeting progressed and the allegations were laid out, I watched that grin fade, replaced by a look of growing panic. "This is ridiculous," Andre sputtered, his face red with anger. "These are baseless accusations. Ron, is this your doing? Are you trying to sabotage me?" I met his gaze calmly. "I'm merely presenting the facts, Andre. The board can draw their own conclusions." As Andre fumbled through his explanations, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. His lack of preparation was glaringly obvious, especially when contrasted with the detailed evidence I had provided. After hours of heated discussion, the board reached a decision. Andre would be placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. As we filed out of the boardroom, I caught Andre's eye. The look of betrayal and fury he shot me would have once cut me to the core. Now, I felt nothing but a sense of justice. Walking back to my office, I allowed myself a small smile. The first phase of my plan was complete. Now, it was time to prepare for the fallout. From my vantage point at the country club bar, I had a perfect view of Letitia as she entered the dining room. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the forced smile on her face as she approached a group of women she once called friends. I sipped my scotch, watching as the women's animated conversation died down at Letitia's approach. There was a moment of awkward silence before one of them made a show of checking her watch and hurriedly excusing herself. The others quickly followed suit, leaving Letitia standing alone, her smile faltering. It had been 2 weeks since news of the affair had leaked to our social circle. I hadn't planned on it happening so quickly, but in a town like ours, secrets had a way of spreading like wildfire. The fallout had been swift and merciless. Letitia had been quietly asked to step down from her positions on various charity committees. Invitations to social events had mysteriously stopped arriving. Even here at the country club, where she had once held court like a queen, she was now treated like a pariah. I felt a twinge of guilt as I watched her make her way to a table in the corner, alone. But then I remembered the years of betrayal, the lies, the pain she had caused our family. As I turned back to my drink, I overheard a conversation at a nearby table. "Can you believe the nerve of her showing up here?" a woman's voice hissed. "I know," another replied, "after what she did to Ron. He's such a good man, always so devoted to his family. It's just disgusting." I couldn't help but feel a spark of satisfaction at their words. My reputation had remained intact throughout this ordeal, thanks in large part to the careful way I had handled the situation. I had been nothing but dignified and composed in public, never speaking ill of Letitia or engaging in petty gossip. Finishing my drink, I stood to leave. As I passed Letitia's table, our eyes met for a brief moment. The look of desperation and pleading in her gaze was almost enough to make me falter. Almost. But then I remembered the conversation I'd had with our children just days ago, trying to explain why Mommy wasn't living at home anymore. The confusion and pain in their eyes had steeled my resolve. I gave Letitia a small nod of acknowledgement before continuing on my way. Later that evening, as I sat in my study going over some paperwork, my phone buzzed with a text from Letitia. "Please, Ron, can we talk? I can't do this anymore. Everyone hates me. I've lost everything." I stared at the message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to respond, to offer some words of comfort, but I knew that any kindness now would only complicate things further. With a heavy sigh, I put the phone down without responding. This was the path Letitia had chosen, and now she had to walk it. As for me, I had my own path to follow, and I couldn't afford to look back. The sterile smell of the medical clinic filled my nostrils as I sat in the waiting room, Robert and Julie fidgeting in the chairs beside me. I had told them we were here for a routine checkup, not wanting to burden them with the real reason for our visit. "Daddy, why do we need to get tests?" Julie asked, her small hand tugging at my sleeve. "We're not sick." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice light. "Sometimes, sweetheart, doctors need to do tests even when we're not sick. It's just to make sure everything is okay." Robert, at 12, was old enough to be suspicious. His eyes narrowed as he looked at me. "Does this have something to do with why Mom isn't living with us anymore?" I felt a pang in my chest at his question. "No, buddy. This is just a regular checkup. Try not to worry, okay?" As we were called into separate rooms for the tests, I silently prayed that Andre's drunken claims about paternity were nothing more than spiteful lies. The next few days of waiting for the results were some of the longest of my life. When Santiago called me into his office to go over the results, I felt like I could hardly breathe. "Relax, Ron," Santiago said, a reassuring smile on his face as he handed me the envelope. "It's good news. You are, without a doubt, the biological father of both Robert and Julie." The relief that washed over me was so intense I had to sit down. "Thank God," I muttered, running a hand over my face. Santiago's expression turned serious. "Now, we need to discuss our next steps. With the DNA results and the evidence of Letitia's infidelity, we have a strong case for full custody. Are you sure you want to pursue this?" I nodded, my resolve firm. "Absolutely. The kids need stability, now more than ever. They need to be with me." Over the next few weeks, as Santiago prepared our case, I threw myself into being there for Robert and Julie. We had family game nights. I attended every school event, and I made sure to have one-on-one time with each of them. It broke my heart to see the confusion and pain in their eyes, but I was determined to provide them with the love and support they needed. The day of the custody hearing arrived all too quickly. As I entered the courtroom, I saw Letitia sitting on the other side with a lawyer. She looked pale and drawn, a far cry from the confident woman she had once been. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, regret, fear, before she quickly looked away. The hearing was grueling. Santiago presented our case methodically, laying out the evidence of Letitia's affair and its impact on our family. He emphasized my stability, my involvement in the children's lives, and the DNA test results. Letitia's lawyer tried to counter with claims of my emotional distance and long work hours, but without concrete evidence, her arguments fell flat. When the judge finally delivered his decision, granting me primary custody with Letitia receiving limited visitation rights, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that Robert and Julie would be with me, sadness for the family we had once been. As we left the courtroom, Letitia approached me, tears in her eyes. "Ron, please," she begged. "Don't take my children away from me. I know I made a mistake, but I love them. They need their mother." I looked at her, feeling a complex mix of emotions. They do need their mother, Letitia. But right now, they need stability more. You'll have your visitation rights. Use that time to rebuild your relationship with them. As I walked away, leaving Letitia sobbing in the hallway, I felt the weight of everything that had happened over the past few months. The betrayal, the anger, the strategic maneuvering. It had all led to this moment. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically, but as I thought of Robert and Julie waiting for me at home, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had to still save my assets against Letitia in the divorce settlements. But right now, we had a new life to build, and I was determined to make it a good one. The date has come for the final divorce settlement. The courthouse loomed before me, its imposing facade a fitting backdrop for the final act of my marriage. I adjusted my tie, took a deep breath, and walked up the stone steps, Santiago at my side. The weight of the past few months pressed down on me, but I felt a strange sense of calm. This was it, the culmination of all my planning and maneuvering. As we entered the courtroom, I caught sight of Letitia and her lawyer. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw a flicker of something, regret, fear, before she quickly looked away. The proceedings began, and Santiago took center stage. He was masterful, presenting our case with a precision and eloquence that left me in awe. The evidence of Letitia's long-term affair with Andre was laid out methodically, each piece fitting together like a damning puzzle. "Your Honor," Santiago said, his voice resonating through the courtroom. "My client, Mr. Stratton, has been the victim of a profound betrayal. Not only did his wife engage in a 3-year affair with his business partner, but she also allowed Mr. Stratton to continue providing for her and their children under false pretenses." I watched as Letitia squirmed in her seat, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. When it was their turn to present their case, I braced myself for what was to come. Letitia's lawyer stood, attempting to paint a picture of me as an emotionally distant workaholic who had driven his client into the arms of another man. "Your Honor, Mrs. Stratton's actions, while regrettable, were the result of years of neglect and emotional abandonment, but their arguments fell flat. Santiago had prepared for this, calling upon family friends to testify about my involvement in our children's lives and my devotion to our family. One by one, they contradicted Letitia's claims of neglect. As the trial progressed, I could see the judge's expression growing increasingly sympathetic towards me. When it came time for the final statements, Santiago delivered the killing blow. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mrs. Stratton's affair was not a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated deception that lasted for years. Mr. Stratton has been nothing but a devoted husband and father, and he deserves to be compensated for the pain and suffering he has endured." The judge nodded gravely, and I felt a surge of hope. When he finally delivered his ruling, it was everything I had hoped for and more. The fault-based nature of our divorce state, combined with the overwhelming evidence of Letitia's infidelity, had swayed the judge decisively in my favor. I was awarded the majority of our assets, including our penthouse and vacation home. To my surprise, the judge even ordered Letitia to pay me spousal support, a rarity in cases like ours, but a testament to how thoroughly Santiago had presented our case. As the gavel fell, finalizing the divorce, I glanced over at Letitia. She sat there shell-shocked, as the full weight of what she had lost crashed down upon her. For a moment, I felt a twinge of pity, but then I remembered the years of lies, the pain she had caused our children. I stood, shook Santiago's hand, and walked out of the courtroom with my head held high. It was over. I was free. The boardroom was silent as I took my seat, the tension palpable. Today was the day we would hear the results of the internal investigation into Andre's conduct. As a major shareholder and board member, I had been deeply involved in the process, but even I wasn't entirely sure what the investigation had uncovered beyond what I already knew. Harold Jameson, the head of our board, cleared his throat and began. Ladies and gentlemen, the results of our investigation into Andre Ackerman's conduct are troubling, to say the least. I watched as he laid out the findings, each revelation more damning than the last. Not only had the investigation confirmed Andre's affair with Letitia and the potential conflicts of interest it presented, but it had also uncovered a pattern of professional misconduct that went far beyond what I had initially suspected. Mr. Ackerman has been using company resources for personal gain, Harold continued, his voice grave. We've found evidence of insider trading, embezzlement, and misuse of company funds for personal expenses. The room erupted into murmurs of shock and disbelief. I sat back, my mind reeling. I had known Andre was corrupt, but the extent of his misconduct was staggering. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that there was only one possible outcome. Andre's position as CEO was untenable. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. Andre Ackerman was to be terminated immediately. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I cast my vote. This was justice, not just for me, but for the company and all the employees who had been unknowingly affected by Andre's actions. As the meeting adjourned, Harold approached me. "Ron, can I have a word?" I nodded, following him to a quiet corner of the room. "Ron, I want you to know that the board has been incredibly impressed with how you've handled this whole situation," Harold began. "Your integrity, your business acumen, it hasn't gone unnoticed." I felt a mix of pride and wariness at his words. "Thank you, Harold. I've just been trying to do what's right for the company." Harold nodded, a small smile on his face. "And that's exactly why we'd like to offer you the position of CEO." I blinked, momentarily stunned. "Harold, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to answer right away," he assured me. "Take some time to think about it. But know that the board is unanimous in this decision. We believe you're the right person to lead us forward after all this upheaval." As I left the office that day, my mind was spinning. CEO of Stratton and Ackerman Investment Bank. It was everything I had ever worked for. But as I thought about Robert and Julie, about the promises I had made to be more present in their lives, I realized I had some serious thinking to do. Over the next few days, I threw myself into developing new policies and procedures for the company. If I was going to take on this role, I was determined to ensure that nothing like Andre's misconduct could ever happen again. When I finally accepted the position, it was with a sense of purpose and determination. I had weathered the storm, both personally and professionally, and come out stronger. Now, it was time to lead others through whatever challenges lay ahead. The sound of laughter echoed through the house as I walked through the front door. I couldn't help but smile as I followed the noise to the kitchen, where I found Robert and Julie engaged in what appeared to be an epic battle of Uno. "Dad!" Julie exclaimed, jumping up to give me a hug. "You're home early." I wrapped my arms around her, savoring the moment. "I promised I'd be here for family game night, didn't I?" Robert looked up from his cards, a grin on his face. "Yeah, but we didn't actually expect you to make it. You're usually stuck at the office." His words stung a bit, but I knew they were fair. In the past, work had often taken precedence over family time. But that was one of the many things I was determined to change. "Well, get used to it, kiddo," I said, ruffling his hair as I sat down at the table. "Your old man's turning over a new leaf." As we played round after round of Uno, punctuated by playful arguments and fits of giggles, I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. This was what mattered. These moments with my children, watching them grow and laugh and just be kids. Later that night, after tucking Julie into bed and saying good night to Robert, I found myself on the balcony of our penthouse, looking out over the city. The past year had been a whirlwind of pain, anger, and calculated moves. But now, as I stood there in the quiet of the night, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. I thought about Letitia, wondering briefly how she was coping with her new reality. Part of me felt guilty for the harshness of her fall from grace, but I quickly pushed that feeling aside. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. My mind drifted to work, to my new role as CEO. It was challenging, more so than I had anticipated, but also incredibly rewarding. I was using my position to advocate for ethical business practices and a healthy work-life balance, determined to create a company culture that valued integrity above all else. And then there was my personal life. I had started dating again cautiously. The experience with Letitia had left its scars, but I was learning to trust again, to open myself up to the possibility of love. As I stood there, reflecting on all that had happened and all that was yet to come, I realized something profound. I was happy, not the shallow surface-level happiness I had clung to during my marriage, but a deep, genuine contentment. I had weathered the storm, faced my worst fears, and come out stronger on the other side. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Raising 2 kids as a single dad while running a major corporation was no small feat. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever life threw my way. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling a sense of excitement for what the future held. This wasn't just an ending. It was a new beginning, and I was ready for it. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.